Hey folks, did you know that Card Player Poker offers free, legal poker games with no deposit required, where the players can win real money? The site is giving away 6 summer poker prize packages that include a $565 buy-in to the $1 million guaranteed live event in Las Vegas starting June 2nd, 2017, along with $500 for travel expenses. Go to poker.cardplayer.com for your chance to win. Again, that's poker.cardplayer.com for your shot to win a free poker package into a $1 million guaranteed live poker tournament this summer.
Poker Stories is an audio series that features casual interviews with some of the game's best players and personalities. Each episode highlights a well-known figure in the poker world and dives deep into their favorite tales both on and off the felt.
That's right, it's time for another edition of Poker Stories, brought to you by Card Player, the Poker Authority, hosted by me, Julio Rodriguez. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the podcast so far. If you are listening to this on YouTube or on the Card Player website, then make sure you subscribe so you can get the latest episode automatically. If you like the show, then please rate it and leave a review. We're going to give away some free digital subscriptions to the magazine each month, so if you'd like to be eligible to win, leave a nice review and then email pokerstories@cardplayer.com with your username. Again, that's pokerstories@cardplayer.com. Leave a review, leave us your username, and you'll have a shot to win that subscription. I'm very excited about today's episode featuring the one and only Mike Sexton. Mike is fresh off of a big score at the LA Poker Classic where he took 4th place for $300,000. The conversation that you are about to hear actually took place in Las Vegas just an hour before Mike got on the road to head to LA in the first place. So we didn't actually get to talk about the most recent LAPC, but we did get into his WPT win in Montreal last year, his WSOP bracelet, his job as commentator for the World Poker Tour, and some classic stories about his first years as a poker pro. I really don't need to sell you on Mike Sexton. Let's go. Mike, great having you here. Great having you here before you hit the road for LA.
Well, I appreciate it. It's good to be back at Card Player.
So, this is what, your 100th trip out to LA right now?
Probably. At least something like that, probably. The first one out there in 1985, I believe it was.
Do you usually fly or make the drive?
Usually I drive to LA because you have to have a car when you're in LA.
Mm-hmm.
So I drive even though you stay at the casino most of the time, but I like to play golf some over there too. So I like to drive and take my clubs and whatnot.
Yeah, what are you shooting these days? You still scratch golfer?
No, I'm a bad golfer. I'm a bogey golfer.
I mean,
at
I know.
Best, and that's not from the back tees either.
Well, you're not playing from the Reds, I hope.
Usually I do play from the Reds, honestly.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not ashamed to go up there at all.
How's the endurance these days? You're putting in any marathon 36-hole sessions anymore?
No, not too many of those. Once in a while, if you get stuck, you have to go back out for another 9, but it's not so bad.
All right, that's good to hear. Let's start at the beginning, because I looked up Shelby, Indiana, and
it's Shelbyville, actually.
Oh, Shelbyville. Okay,
Yeah.
Wikipedia got it wrong then.
Because
Shelby has 539 people as of 2010.
No.
So
Shelbyville, it's 30 miles south of Indianapolis, actually.
Okay, tell me what was it like growing up in Shelbyville?
Well, I was only there till I was like 4 years old.
Okay.
So then we moved to Dayton, Ohio from there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually grew up in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, and just you and your brother Tom, or any other siblings?
Yeah, me and my brother Tom and my mom. My parents got divorced, and my mom just took us to Dayton, Ohio, and that's where we ended up growing up.
And what did you get into as a kid? I know you were a gymnast, but what was the younger days
Yeah,
like?
as a kid, we played all the sports, Little League Baseball and whatnot, but the Dayton YMCA was our savior back in those days, actually. We went every Saturday morning as a kid and then found tumbling classes and signed up on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and we were real good at it, pretty good at it, and then we joined the Y tumbling team and got into gymnastics from there. So ever since we were just wee high, 8 years old, 9 years old, we've been doing somersaults and flips. So
it kept you out of trouble.
Pretty much. We didn't get in much trouble, actually. Not too bad, anyway, for kids.
Men's gymnastics, what was that like back then? Rings and pommel horse?
When we grew up, in our state, in Ohio, in our high school, gymnastics was a varsity sport that you could get a letter at. that doesn't happen anywhere today. Now it's all club gymnastics now. But back then,
There was no gymnastics in my high school.
every school in our league had a team. A lot of schools in Dayton had them.
Mm-hmm.
Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland. We had a state championship, and it was a big deal back then. So, very lucky for us that our high school, had a gymnastics program, because that's the reason both my brother and I got full scholarships to college. So, had they not had that, that would have never happened for us. So,
what was your expertise?
My best event back then was trampoline. It was still an event in the NCAA back then. My senior year in college was the last year that trampoline was an official event in NCAA gymnastics, and then they took it out and went to the 6 Olympic events, and I was so mad about it. I boycotted gymnastics for 20 years.
You could probably get away with telling people that you were so good at it, they just decided to cancel the event altogether.
Yeah, it wasn't the case, though. But it was my best event, and, I was pretty decent at floor exercise and vaulting and parallel bars. But, I was a decent collegiate gymnast. I won the high score award every year at Ohio State, was the most valuable gymnast my senior year. But at that time, Ohio State was at the bottom of the Big Ten. We weren't very good in gymnastics, honestly.
Really?
And now they compete for a national title every year. So, I'm very proud of the program and the way it's grown and how good it is now. But back then, honestly, we weren't that good. And that's the reason my brother didn't go to Ohio State. In fact, he chose to go to Oklahoma. Instead, we were in the same grade, and he had a phenomenal career there. He became the first All-American gymnast at Oklahoma, and he just had a great career.
Wait, so you guys are in the same grade? So you guys are...
We're in the same grade. My mother held him back in 8th grade, and she just wasn't pleased with him or something.
I don't think
he didn't flunk or anything, and so he and I are a year apart. But
you grew up together.
So from then on, we grew up together. We were real close.
Yeah. So I made sure to write down in my notes the Ohio State University, because I know how.
Yeah, it's the. It wasn't even the when I went there, but it's the now. So no.
Public recreation is what they said you got your degree in.
Yeah, well,
so
I started out in business, then I went to teaching, then I went, I'll tell you the truth, I was on a full scholarship, and because of that, because I wasn't paying to go to college, I just didn't put a lot of effort in the classes, honestly, and I'm embarrassed about it now, and I'm not proud of it, but, I wouldn't even sign up for a course back in those days if you had attendance was required,
Oh, wow.
Like those big auditorium classes, nobody knew if you were there or not,
You like the ones you can show up for the
and
finals.
all I had to do was just go to practice from 4 to 6 every day, and other than that, I slept in a lot of the mornings, and it's not anything to be proud of course. So
this was the
actually the easiest
60s,
way
right?
out. Yeah, back in the 60s, yeah.
So what was life like for a varsity athlete on a university back then? I assume it isn't quite like today.
It's pretty much like today. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Wearing a varsity jacket.
Special treatment?
And now, you don't get special treatment really as an average gymnast, so to speak. But it's not like you're the quarterback of the football team.
Right.
And it was I got just as much as the quarterback of the football team in terms of room and board, expenses, meal money, tuition, everything, the work. So it was good in that regard.
I remember I got under your skin a little bit in 2007 during the Florida-Ohio State championship game.
Oh, boy.
The Greg Oden years.
You have to bring that one up. We ran the opening kickoff back for a touchdown.
Oh, no, that was the football championship.
Oh, yeah. I'm talking about football, yeah.
That was like,
I don't know if it was about 2007, but I know one thing. I hated the SEC back in those days, I'll tell you the truth.
Well, you got our coach.
We beat Alabama a couple years ago, and won our own national championship back. So
you took my coach, Urban Meyer, and it's working out.
Well,
for
it was
you.
the smartest thing we did was get him. I can tell you, he's
better
great.
than Tressel, I guess.
Yeah, Tressel was good too, though, but he's not Urban Meyer.
Exactly. All right, so you get out of college, public recreation degree, but then you join the Army as a paratrooper. I mean, that's got to be intense. Tell me what that was like.
It did. Now this was back in the Vietnam War. You have to remember that. And you had a draft, and
so you were drafted.
There was draft back then. I was not drafted.
Okay.
They had a lottery, and if your birthday fell at an early date, you got drafted. And if it was a late date, and I had a big high drawing, and nobody could believe I was signing up for the Army. They said, "Are you out of your mind? You're going to go to Vietnam, especially if you're a paratrooper." I said, "Well, if I do, I do." But I'd done flips all my life. I always wanted to jump out of planes. It just seemed like the fun thing to do. And I really believe that everybody should have served in the armed forces back then. And I still believe it today, incidentally. And it always bothered me that kids could get out of, going to the service, because they got married or because they're going to college or their family had money or something, and I never thought that was fair.
Circumstance, yeah.
I think everybody, as soon as they get out of high school, should serve 2 years. I don't care if you're physically unable. You can sit at a desk and do something. You can volunteer.
I believe there's some countries overseas that do that.
And there are. And, honestly, I think we should do it as well. But in any case, I wanted to join the Army, and so I did and really loved it, honestly. And, I love jumping out of planes. I love being in the 82nd Airborne Division. Training was great. It was, for me, first you go to basic, and then you go to AIT, and then you go to jump school. Mm-hmm. And I went to jump school down at Fort Benning, Georgia, and it was in August. It was so hot, and, you never forget it when you go there. But you run so much. Now, I've never been a great runner, You always get side aches if you run a lot, but, boy, you ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. So I was glad to get out of there. You're in there for 3 weeks. And but it was fun. I really, really did like it.
Did you see Band of Brothers?
And
was it anything like what was it, the David Schwimmer character, just making him run up the hill back and forth?
Yeah,
Currahee, they called it. I think.
You never forget your drill instructor when you're in the in the Army and all, mm-hmm. and it's pretty much like in the movies, like you see, they're always screaming and hollering, and you don't forget them. But then I got assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, and looking back on it now, I realize how lucky I was, because the 82nd had just come back from their second tour of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So I never left Fort Bragg when I was in the Army.
Oh, man.
So looking back now, I realized how lucky I was. But back then I thought, well, if I go, I go, Mm-hmm. And you didn't think much about it. But now I realize it was a blessing. I didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, talk about luck for sure. So you learned poker as a teenager, though?
I did, yeah. When I was 13 years old, my neighbor taught me how to play, Danny Robinson, and he went on.
Legendary stud player.
Legendary. So, many think he's the greatest 7-card stud player ever. And he and Chip Reese partnered up. They're both from the Dayton area. And Danny lived right behind me. We were best friends growing up. Now, he was 2 years older than I was. And but when he taught me how to play at 13, he kept me broke. He gave me his paper out. And then he'd meet me on the back porch after I delivered papers all week. Back then, you collected on Friday nights from your customers. Mm-hmm. So I'd collect from my customer, and there'd be Danny shuffling the cards on my back porch, and he'd beat me out of my money every week, and I never did wake up that he was way better than I was. So, but anyway, once I got rid of Danny and went off to college on my own and started playing cards, whether it was gin rummy or hearts or poker or whatever it was, I realized I was way better than these guys in the dorm.
You just weren't good at game selection.
So yeah, so who knew that Danny was one of the best in the world? I didn't know it at the time, and of course him and Chip came out to Las Vegas and became legends out here. And and I stayed in North Carolina when I got out of the Army, and took a job as a sales rep for a military sales company where we sold to the PXs and commissaries in Northern South Carolina. Got married.
What were you selling?
We just sold various products to the PX and the commissary. Mm-hmm. Alberta Culver products and other various products. And
were you good at it?
So I was okay at it, but the problem with
I only asked because you're a natural salesman on camera.
Yeah. I was good at it, but the problem was I was finding home poker games to play at night. And I'd have to quit the poker game about 1 a.m. to drive to Camp Lejeune or drive somewhere where you might sell something and make some money, when I knew I could make money in that poker game. So after 3.5 years probably playing too much poker, I ended up getting a divorce. And I was single again. I thought, I'm just going to quit this job and just play poker for a living. I just love playing in the games. And I had a game every day I could play in, and ran a game. And, I could run a game. So...
And at this point, you still hadn't been out to Vegas.
And no, so I hadn't been to Vegas. So I started playing in the poker games. I just quit my job and said, if I get broke, I can always go back and get another job. And for literally over 20 years, I never had another paycheck. My next paycheck came from Card Player Magazine, $100 for writing the columns for them twice a month. So
that wasn't recent, guys.
Yeah,
we've upped the rates a little bit.
This was 1996, I can tell you.
But I want to go back to those early games in North Carolina. What were the games like? What games were you playing?
The games were great. Stakes? And in most games that we played, we had a rule: if you could explain it, you could deal it. So because of that, you played a wide variety of games. Wild card games and crisscross and all cards down and replace a card, and just about any games that you can think of. But the biggest game we played, believe it or not, in the best poker game I've ever been to this day, was 7-card stud, high-low split, mm-hmm. declare with chips.
What is declare?
And all 7 cards are all down.
What?
You never see a card. And it's a forced bet. It was 10, 20, 30, 40, forced bet. You had to better get out. So in other words, it just rotated around the table.
No checking.
You know, so there's no checking. You bet or you folded your hand.
Man.
Okay, and now the next time the next guy was up, he bet or folded his hand. Now at the end, the guy who bet last declares first. It was a verbal declare. So you verbally declared whether you're going high or you're going low or you're going both ways. Now if you went both ways, you had to win both ways.
Oh, was there a qualifier?
So
like
no, there's no qualifier.
Okay.
But, you know, if you had a wheel, for example, and I went both ways and I had a wheel and a flush, I would lose the pot to you because you have to win both ways to scoop the pot.
If you get counterfeited, you lose.
But the key to the game is getting yourself in position. You know, like you might raise and take the last bet on 6th Street, so the other guy has to bet first on 7th Street, for example, you know, kind of thing. So there's some strategy involved. Even though you can't see any cards, you get a pretty good feel of which direction guys are going, and I just happen to have a better feel than most in that game. But it was unusual, and I'll tell you, it was an amazing game. We played at Nashville, North Carolina. I drove 100 miles 2 days a week to play in this game on Tuesday and Thursday. If you didn't get there by noon, you didn't get a seat in the game. It was full of farmers and tobacco farmers, and these guys played in the game. It was phenomenal, actually.
Do you remember any particularly brutal losses?
It was really a lot of fun.
Brutal sessions or
great
sessions?
No, not really. You know, I really won all the time in the game. I mean, honestly. And so it was just great, you know. And
were you surprised they kept
sadly, even though I'd win at poker 5 days a week, 6 days a week, then on the weekend I'd bet the sports, and by Monday I'd owe the bookmaker. So, you know, no matter how much I won during the week, I blew it on the weekends. That's how dumb I was back then, of course.
Were you betting on your alma mater? Or?
And, yeah, I bet on them usually, but I bet on everybody. It didn't matter who I bet on, but it's pathetic when I think how, you know, much I've lost in my life betting on sports. It's really nothing I'm proud of, but I only bring it up just so other people don't fall in the same trap I did.
Well, it's a common trap for a lot of poker players. You know, there's a reason the sports book is next to the poker room in most casinos.
Yeah, no. I mean, most poker players, especially high-stakes poker players, have gamble in them, you know, and they're going to bet on sports or they're going to bet on the golf course, or, you know, and whatever they do, they're going to bet high. Now, a number of players, especially back in the old days, not so many nowadays, used to go off in the pit quite a bit.
Yeah.
You know, as well. And I never did that. And, you know, and then obviously some do drugs and some go to titty bars and, you know, some of them, there's a lot of vices you can fall into.
There's a lot of vices, especially in this city.
If you allow yourself. And, you know, Bobby Baldwin told me a long time ago, he said, you know, if you're really good at poker and you live in Las Vegas and you're really good, he said, you can survive if you have one bad habit. He said, if you have more than one, he said, you don't have any chance to survive. So, you know, I had one, and it wasn't enough to keep me surviving. But, I mean, I did survive. But one bad one is all you need to just stay broke.
Have you quit cold turkey, or do you still
No, I haven't. No way I'll quit cold turkey.
I'm about to say, a gambler's a gambler.
But, you know, yeah. You know, but I used to bet way more than I had. And then when I got a hold of big money, then I really started betting real big. And then I went through that, and so now I've calmed down a little bit. But still, it's like my favorite thing to do. I mean, if you're sitting at home watching a game, how do you possibly not have a bet on it, you know?
Well, I just want to go back to your mindset, like what, you know, because you're a card player, you're successful, you know the numbers there.
Yeah.
And you know the numbers when it comes to sports betting, too.
Yeah. No, it's true.
So what drives people?
You know, I was never, you know, what drives people is a couple things. A, it's fun to do.
Yeah, there's a rush.
And B, if you win, you know, you feel like, you know, winning is just so great. You know, you think you're so smart, and you see your bookmaker on Mondays. Mm-hmm. And then even if you're broke, it's also a good way, you know, it's a good time to bet because, at least in my case it was, because even if I lost and owed bookmakers, you know, none of them would track me down or send Guido after me or nothing.
Yeah.
Because they knew I could make money and pay them back. So, you know, they never worried about me, you know, paying them.
Keep them in action, they'll eventually get it back.
Yeah. And, so, you know, I could always get credit with the bookmakers, and
so you didn't come to Vegas fleeing North Carolina bookmakers or anything like that?
No, not at all.
Because I read, so
I came here to try to win some money to pay them back sometime. But
so you became a poker pro in the mid-'70s, something like that?
Yeah, but 1977 officially is when I quit my job, I think.
Okay, so, but you didn't come to the series for almost a decade, right?
No, I didn't. You know, I came out and visited Chip and Danny because Danny was my best friend. Him and Chip were living together in Las Vegas, had this luxurious bachelor pay. He said, you got to come out, you got to come out, you got to come out. So I finally came out to Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And I stayed at their house, and I was so wowed by this. You know, now these guys had come out in the summer of '74, I believe it was, might have been '73, with a $1,000 bankroll between them. That's all they had. They took $1,000 and in 4 months' time turned into $1 million. Now we're talking about 1974. Think about it. And it's amazing, what legends they became back in the day. Now, back then, casino owners played in the real high-stakes games, and they started out just playing in 15, 30, 7-card stud around the clock. Chip would play 12 hours. Danny would play 12 hours. They'd tag team each other. One would go home and sleep. The other one would play. But they stayed in action 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then Chip finally went down to the Flamingo where they were playing the big game, which was 2 and 400 back in those days with Johnny Moss and those guys. And he watched it. And they were playing high-low split. And he went back to Danny. He said, Danny, he said, I can beat these guys. He said, I'm watching them. They just don't play that good. So they took a big chunk of their bankroll and fired it in that game, and then they never looked back after that.
That's how these gamblers are made. I mean, these guys, they have the story. Right? Who was it? Was it Freddie Deeb who turned $500 into $100,000 in one day in a card room doing the same thing? Just running it up.
Yeah. Freddie Deeb, Sam Grizzle. There's certain guys in history that are not afraid to parlay it up. They come in with nothing, but as soon as they get enough for the buy-in for the next highest game, they jump in that game. Yeah. And then when they get the buy-in for the next high, they jump in that game. So by nightfall,
they're in the biggest game in the room.
They're either going to be broke or they're going to have a big bankroll. So, that's the way to do it. But, so I came out here in Vegas and played some poker out here. But back in those days, I fell in love with coaching Little League Baseball.
Okay.
And that was my passion. Now, back then, the World Series was in April and May. It wasn't in the summertime like it is now.
The actual Little League World Series.
Yeah. I mean, Little League, when, in North Carolina where I coached, I'd met my second wife, and she had a 9-year-old when I met her. And so I raised him up. But, he was playing Little League Baseball when I met him. I fell in love with it. And when he aged out, I wanted to get my own team. So I got my team, and I just loved it. And, because Little League season, you start practicing in April. Yeah. And the season starts in May. And it's the same time as the World Series. So I had to make a choice, and I never came out to the World Series. And finally, it wasn't until 1984 that I came out to the World Series for the first time, even though I've been coming to Vegas since 78. And I said, I've been dying to come out to the World Series. Now, back then, you only had one event every other day. That's all you could play. They played down to the final table on day one. Day two was the final table. No other tournament was going on. You had to play cash games back then.
Exactly.
And then the next day was a tournament. So if you came out for a week, you could only play in 3 events. So I came out for a week. I played 3 events. I made 2 final tables, and I said, I'm never missing another World Series. And to this day, I've never missed another one.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's the way to do it.
And then I moved to Las Vegas in January of '85. Because of the success I had at that World Series, and I often wonder, boy, if I'd have flopped out and never done it, I wonder if I'd still been in North Carolina today. Who knows?
Yeah, that every poker player's got that story, that one thing that went right for them at the crucial moment where it was a turning point, But I want to get back to this Chip, because I heard a story, and I wanted to ask if it's true, that Chip didn't understand how much water bills should cost, and he left his hose running all day.
Yeah, he might have done that. It sounds more like Stu Unger to me.
Really?
Where Stu, even when he had $1 million, they turned his lights off because he wouldn't pay the electric bill sometimes. I mean, he was that, and poker players are like that, But Chip, I'm surprised because Chip he was so much smarter than everybody else in life and in poker and in cards and in every gambling of any kind. So that would surprise me about Chip, but probably not really.
Is Chip the greatest in your mind, or was Stu the
I think
greatest?
he was the greatest all-around player. He had the best demeanor at a poker table I've ever seen of anybody. I mean, never one time did I ever see him get mad at a dealer, raise his voice at another player, criticize another player on how they played, never complained about losing a pot, never moaned, groaned, threw cards at the dealer, none of that stuff. I mean, he was just calm, cool, and collected. And I said to him once, because he always played in the highest poker games for 30 years. Now think about it. Not once in 30 years' time that I ever saw Chip was he ever in the second highest poker game in the room. It was always the biggest game in the room. Now think about that. Even Doyle's played in the second highest game sometimes. But Chip never played but in the biggest game, whatever it was. And that's an amazing feat when you think about it.
And to go 30 years, because you see people who were playing 5 years ago that can't get into that room today.
Yeah. And, I said to Chip once, I said, Chip, what separates you? Why are you better than these other guys that you play with all the time? He said, Mike, I'll tell you. He said, when these other guys are on their A game, he said, I don't play any better. He said, we all play about the same. He said, the difference is they have a C and a D game. He said, I don't. In other words, they steam. When they're stuck and they're steaming, they start playing bad. And, even the best players in the world when they're steaming, are the best players to play with, on occasion, believe it or not, when they're stuck in steaming. So, because, there's plenty of action, and Chip recognized that. And,
well, what about you back in those days, as your grinding days?
Yeah, I mean, I was always playing. Normally, it was 30-60 for me back in the days when I first came to Vegas, and 50 and 175, 150. That was my range that I played in back in those days.
Those are big games today.
Yeah,
let alone and back then.
And mostly it was 7-card stud, high-low splits. What I played most of the time back then. I was pretty good at stud. Now stud was very popular when I first came out to Vegas. There were a few limit hold'em games, but mostly it was 7-card stud. And then limit hold'em. I mean, no limit hold'em didn't even exist in those days. It didn't even exist till the World Poker Tour came around past the turn of the century. You couldn't find a no limit hold'em game anywhere in the country prior to that on a regular basis. But back then it was all limit hold'em and limit poker and 7-card stud and 7-card stud 8 or better, which was my game. And that's the game I played for a living. And it's the game I won my bracelet in 1989, the first one. And to me, that was my world championship because that's the event I played every day. I didn't play no limit hold'em back then. And so that was special. So,
let's talk about the boom. Do you like the phrase moneymaker boom? I assume you prefer poker boom to moneymaker boom.
Yeah, I prefer World Poker Tour boom because honestly,
you're gonna take all the credit.
No, I promise you. I mean, moneymaker was a factor. Online poker was a factor. The truth of the matter, the real truth of the matter, it was the World Poker Tour that created the poker boom. They're the one that put the show on in prime time on a weekly basis, and the popularity of the World Poker Tour every night on the Wednesday night on the Travel Channel. That show was so popular that it just exploded from there. Yeah. Then come along moneymaker right after that, and online poker was exploding. It was just that combination of things at the perfect time in history that just caused the explosion. But moneymaker certainly had a role, and there's no doubt about it. But it was television that played the role.
If you ask Chris, he's modest about it too. He's like, I don't know why they call it the moneymaker boom. I have a good name.
I promise you, I'm not saying it because I was with the World Poker Tour. It was the World Poker Tour that caused the explosion.
So let's talk about getting in with the WPT. This is 2002. Well, actually, 2002 is when they started, but they must have approached you earlier. Was there an audition process? Were there other people
No, there's no audition at all. I mean, the audition for me was back in the late 90s, Steve Lipscomb, who created the World Poker Tour, did a documentary at the World Series of Poker. Mm-hmm. And he did an interview with me during that documentary.
This was 99?
Yeah. And then, no, this was before that, 97 or 8. And then I put on the Tournament of Champions in 1999 for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And the last year, I put on a live internet broadcast, and internet wasn't even popular back then. And we got Steve Lipscomb to film it for us. So he filmed it. Now, it was my tournament because I created it and put it on. So I did the commentary at the final table. Now, when the tournament's over with, he comes up to me and says, Mike, he said, that was the best job of poker commentary I've ever heard. I said, well, thanks. I didn't think anything about it. Then a year later, there was a poker tournament in Costa Rica. And Steve Lipscomb was invited down there by Linda Johnson, and I went down, and he had lunch with Linda and I, and he said, I've got an idea for you two. Now, at this time, Linda Johnson, on-card player, was the biggest thing in poker, and I'd put on the Tournament of Champions, so I was out there among the players, at that time. And he told us his idea about the World Poker Tour, putting it on television, making poker a sport, and blah.
Yeah.
And, of course, we loved it. And he said, but I don't have any money. It's going to take $3.5 million for a couple years, to produce it and put on the shows, et cetera, et cetera. Do you know anybody that might be interested in doing that? And I said, I do. And I had 2 people in mind for him. And one was Lyle Berman, who's a Poker Hall of Famer, who was also the Casino Man of the Year once. And the other one was going to be Jerry Buss, the owner of the Los Angeles Lakers. Well, we never got to Jerry Buss. We got to Lyle, and Linda and I went with him to make the presentation to Lyle, and then he started the World Poker Tour, and the rest is history, as they say. And, then he came to me and said, Mike, he said, I got good news and bad news for you. The good news is I want you to be a commentator on the World Poker Tour. The bad news is if you take the job, you can't play in any of the tournaments.
Was that a company rule or a gaming regulation?
That was his rule, no.
Okay.
It was just his rule. He just felt, he chose Vince as the other commentator, that if we played the events and made the final table, somebody might think it was fishy ears. the deck was stacked or something. He didn't want to take any chances of any kind of image.
Well, I remember
that something was going wrong.
I remember back in those days when poker was starting to come out of the shadows and become more mainstream, people were very careful about how they presented it on television, to the point where they didn't even like talking about chops because, it might be.
Well, he didn't allow deals on the World
know.
Poker Tour, believe it or not. And something he and I had discussions about, because I'm against it. I'm a poker player. And to me, unless they're adding money to the prize pool, where they can dictate the terms of what you have to do, anybody's putting money in the prize pool, now I think they have a right to tell you can't. But if it's all your money, like it was, all the players' money, how can they tell somebody they can't make a deal? But he knew the drama and understood the drama of television.
Exactly.
And you don't get the same, if you split up all the money, there is no big reaction now if you lose, kind of thing, or excitement when you win. And he said, look, the PGA Tour doesn't allow people to chop when they go in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You can't chop the prize money, and we're not doing it here either. And
the difference between the PGA Tour and the World Poker Tour is the World Poker Tour is highlighting the money at stake.
Well, the players put up all the money in the World Poker Tour.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
But in golf, someone's putting for third place, and it's
exactly.
Like
but that was his analogy
putt.
anyway, because the drama on television is much higher, he felt.
Yeah.
If they were playing for the big difference of 500,000. Now back then, you got to realize every event had $1 million first place prize just about, because all our buy-ins in the early days were 10,000 was the minimum buy-in. We had a 15,000 twice a year, and then a $25,000 championship event buy-in, and that was enormous back then. Yeah. But they were all 10K buy-ins, and we didn't switch that till about 7 years into the WPT, and it's a good thing they switched it. Otherwise, we might not exist today, to be honest with you. I mean, the market just couldn't stand pounding everybody with 10K buy-ins all the time. So, wisely they dropped it to 5Ks and 3,500s for the televised events, and it's been way, way, way better for them.
And if people
allows
are
more players to play.
Multiple bullets anyway.
And it creates more satellite winners. It creates more people an opportunity to play, and it's just better.
I read that Eric Seidel and a few other players were very against whole card cameras.
They were very against it in the beginning, and I had to sit down and talk to a lot of them and say, look, you're playing for this kind of prize money because this event's on television. You wouldn't have a field half this big if it wasn't for television, which they wouldn't back in those days.
Yeah.
Probably not 25% as big. But back then, everybody wanted to be on TV, and the prize pools were so big, everyone wanted to play and win them. In fact, the biggest stars in poker today, believe it or not, are still the guys that won back on the early years of the World Poker Tour. And we all know they're not near as good as the players are today, but still they're the biggest names in poker today because they were the ones that won on television back in the early days and became the biggest stars in poker. And
you're not talking about Seidel, of course, on that
well,
one.
no, Eric Seidel is one that's gone through the ages and
Daniel as well.
Still remarkable.
People are still on the top of their game.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, there's a few that have seeped through, but for the most part, if you look back at the winners the first 5 years, you don't see many of them around these days.
Well, I'm sure was that the case before in poker when you were coming up, in the 80s and 90s? Did you see a lot of people drop off? Because nowadays I'm talking to people in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're telling me their only ambition in life growing up was to become a poker player. But back then, I assume you kind of just fell into it. Yeah,
you sort of fall into it, and but back in the old days, tournament poker wasn't big. It wasn't that big. You had the World Series once a year, and that was it, basically. I mean, and even during the World Series, the best players, the Chips, the Doyles, the Stewies, they played the cash games because you could win more in a cash game in one day than if you won the tournament.
Except for Phil. Phil was playing the tournament.
That's how big they were back in those days.
Yeah.
But I promise you, had Doyle Brunson, had Chip Reese, had Puggy Pearson, had these guys played tournament poker since the 70s and played all the events, Phil would be so far behind him in bracelets right now, it wouldn't even be funny. Now, I know the fields were smaller and all, but they didn't play tournaments. Didn't mean anything back in those days. It was just winning cash. What
about yourself?
Thing about the World Series of poker.
You missed almost a decade of World Series. I'm sure you could have had a few more bracelets as well.
Oh yeah, I could have if I'd have played them all. And but once I got the taste in my mouth, the first time I ever went to the World Series, I knew I'd never miss another World Series. And because I got outdrawn in the first Pot Lemon Omaha event that they ever held at the World Series with 5 left, I'll never forget it. But where I thought I should have won the bracelet the very first time I came out to the World Series of Poker. It took me 5 more years to get it, but I knew right then my desire, my passion in life was to get one of those bracelets because, back then they only gave out like a dozen a year. It's not like now where they give out 65 or whatever it is. There's only a dozen you could get back
then. It's
more. And so it was very prestigious. The bracelets were a lot nicer. They were really solid gold and really pure, but that would put you in the upper echelon of being a player back then, and even does today, actually. And I salute the World Series, how they marketed the bracelet, because as poker players, it should be all about the money.
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, I can remember a few years back when a guy won 3 bracelets at the World Series of Poker, and his total wins was like $700,000 because he won the 7-card studs and the Raz and something else, but he got all the press because he won 3 bracelets. Now somebody that won a $1,500 no limit hold'em might got $1.2 million, so he won $500,000 more, but he didn't get any press compared to this guy. So it's all about the bracelets. They market the bracelets. And even today, players talk about. It's all they talk about. How many bracelets have you won?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of all-time earnings, so to speak. Which should be the real ranking of players. So to speak. If you're talking about what you're playing for, which is money, but they brainwashed the players, so to speak, and me too. I fell in that category, and it is about the bracelets. And if you don't have one, you want to play and get one.
Well, let's talk about the World Series for a little bit. You did call them out a few years ago, and what it's kind of interesting with your reputation when you speak, people listen, whereas opposed where someone else is complaining about the World Series, even a world champion could complain about the World Series, and everyone just goes, "Stop talking."
Yeah. Well, first of all, in history, I doubt there's very many. You couldn't count on one hand people that love the World Series more than I do. Mm-hmm. Ever since the beginning, since I went there from day one, I've never missed it every year. So I'm a huge World Series fan. But I did not call them out. I was asked my opinion about the November 9, and I'm all for trying something new if it's going to benefit poker. I was all for it the first year or so, to see how it worked out, and tested it, even though I didn't like it because I didn't think it created a fair playing field. I don't think a guy should be allowed to study 4 more months and get coaching and all that before he finishes a poker tournament. I didn't like him holding your money. I thought it was terrible that people that lived in Finland or Australia or something had to come all the way back. I mean, one time somebody's going to come back with like 3 big blinds, and you're going to fly in from Australia, and you get no more money if you finish in 9th place.
Yeah.
So I didn't like that. But the worst part was to me, suppose a Doyle Brunson made the final table in July and then died in August or September before the final table,
Let's find some wood to knock on.
Or not just Doyle, any player. Doesn't matter who it is. Sometime somebody's going to die before the final table takes place. And when it does, now you're going to have a morgue around the final table. You're going to have a little casket in that guy's seat, a little thing on the table, and they're going to blind him off. And it's just going to create an environment that's terrible. And whoever wins it, they're all going to say, well, if that guy was there, you would have never won it. And that's going to be a shadow over him. And I just don't think it's a good idea from those reasons. And now I know that they pay you 9th place money and you get $1 million, but there's a big difference in $1 million and $4 million.
Yeah.
Or $1 million and $8 million. And in July, people want to move their families. You might want to, your life might change completely from $4 million from $1 million, so to speak, of where you want to live and what you want to do and grow up, et cetera. So, I just think the negatives outweighed the positives, and I expressed it, and, I don't know if they were happy with it, the World Series. And
you kind of are, like, if you're an average person off the street, I never thought about this, but you kind of are held hostage a little bit in those 4 months because you have $1 million, and that's fine. But, yeah, there's a huge difference between 1st and 9th place, and you kind of can't make any decisions until you see where you end up.
Yeah, but even like 4th place or 5th place where you get 3, 4, 5 million.
Huge difference.
Or whatever it is. It's a big difference. And I don't like the idea that guys can train and get coaching and become better players. Mm-hmm. They're going to be a completely different player when you see them now in November than they were back when you played with them in July. And I just don't think you should penalize good players, which is what you're doing. You're rewarding weaker players because now they have time to become better players.
And, of course, the argument that Ty and Jack would make is, well, we need time to air them, see how they got to the final table.
But see, I don't buy that.
The World Poker Tour doesn't always show how they get to the final table, you know what I mean?
No, I understand, but I don't buy it. I think that their ratings would be the same if they held the final table 2 or 3 days later, in July. Say you finished on a Wednesday, you could have the final table on Saturday, for example. You could fly all your friends and family in those 2 days' time, give players a couple days off, fill up the arena. It'll be packed just like it is now. Wouldn't be any difference. Now, marketing-wise, the first couple of years it benefited the players dramatically because in the beginning, players could get patch deals from online sites and all that. But obviously, once they stopped online poker in the U.S., none of those deals existed anymore. So now players don't have that opportunity. It doesn't exist anymore like it used to. You can't make that kind of money that you could make back in the day when online poker was around. So because they can't benefit and make more money now,
Yeah.
I just think it's time just to go back to finish the tournament when you start it. That's all.
Well, you brought up online poker. I want to talk about party poker because you mention it in the book that you had a pretty big gamble with them, right? Because I'm sure at the time when you signed up party poker, there were all these sites and they were all trying to grab the top known players. And
actually, there weren't many sites when I started with party poker.
Well, not when you started party poker, but after that there was like a flood of them, and some of them didn't always turn out the greatest.
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's unique at that time. When we started, Paradise Poker was the king. Nobody ever thought anybody would catch them back in the day. And then they had Mike Carroll's site, which was Planet Poker. It wasn't his site, but he was the face of the site at that time. But they always had software glitches and problems.
I remember Daniel had his own site.
And then we were starting Party Poker about the same time PokerStars was starting their site. And, I was hired to be the poker domain expert from somebody, a company that really knew nothing about poker. And they just heard that online poker might be the next thing. They were already in the online casino business. They had blackjack games and roulette games and stuff already. They'd done that for a couple years. And so they hired me, a couple days before Christmas of 2000. A week later, I was in India working with a software development team, to create Party Poker.
Were you gung-ho right away, or were you like, this isn't going to work? You can't even see the players' faces.
No, because I'd seen Paradise Poker, and I, was familiar with online poker.
No, I didn't mean like on Party Poker. I meant like on the concept of online poker, just in general.
Yeah, well, the reason it's so successful is because it is live. It's happening right now. I mean, you might be sitting in Germany, and he might be sitting in Australia, and I'm sitting in California, and the other guy's in Florida or somewhere else, but everybody's there at the same time.
Yeah.
Might be a different time in your time zone, but you're all sitting there playing just like you were in a casino sitting at a table playing. And because it's live is why it worked. And, it's fantastic, and it was ingenious. And
I'm just wondering if any of the purists, the old guard, like had some reservations at first. Or
Well, you always have reservations because, the reservation, obviously, from old school players, how do you trust that? Who do you know who's operating? Who do you know who's dealing the cards? Why are they going to let you win? How do you know the guy sitting in the other seat's not working for the casino that they're building, and they just let him win every pot and take all your money? I mean, this is the concept.
Natural skeptics, card players.
That they had back in those days. But, back in the early days, in the 70s, even when I came out here, I mean, there was a lot of shady things going on in card rooms, because the casinos didn't run the card rooms back in those days. Individuals ran the card rooms, and they just paid rent to the casino, so the casino never paid attention to what went on in that room, really.
Yeah.
So some, strange things happened in those rooms, let's say. But once the casinos took over running the card room, where their reputation is now on the line, now it's their mission to keep the games honest and pure, and now you got the cameras in the sky that they're always looking at and all that. So it's became a much cleaner game now, certainly since casinos took over poker.
Well, I read that you sold your stock in Party, but that you obviously still work for them. What do you feel like the current temperature is for online poker in the world? You like where it's headed, or? Well,
certainly it's expanding globally. I mean, poker's expanded globally a lot the last few years, and it's going to continue to expand globally, I believe. And it's no longer America's game. It hasn't been for a while now. I mean, poker is very popular in every country, just about, and you have great players in every country. And Asia is obviously the new biggest boom that everybody's looking at. And if China or Japan, these countries legalize poker in their countries and online gaming, I mean, you'll see another explosion bigger than the one we saw back in, 2002 and 2003.
When the World Poker Tour boom happened.
When the World Poker Tour started, yes. But online poker exploded in as well. But certainly online poker was a big boom, for example, to the World Series of Poker. And, they made a fortune from online poker sites, advertising, and Party Poker sponsored the World Series in 2006. They paid $20 million to sponsor it. They paid $2 million just to put a sign up in valet parking, for example.
Wow.
They sponsored the Tournament of Champions where they put up $2 more million. I mean, that's the kind of money that was flying around back in those days because online poker was so successful. And when UIGEA was passed, in October 2006, it's when Party Poker had to leave the country. But They were the Coca-Cola of online poker back then. We had 58% of the entire market when we left the U.S. back in those days. And people don't know it nowadays because the party hadn't been around for 10, 12 years in the States. But the truth of the matter is they were the king back in those days, and we were doing over $2 million a day in revenue back then, just from our poker site. So it was big business, and it's unfortunate that we had to leave the U.S. And obviously, as we know, PokerStars, Full Tilt, and some other sites stayed on because they weren't publicly traded companies at that time.
Yeah.
And they didn't think they'd be punished, and they lasted 5 more years. And obviously, our customers went over because they were going to play to Full Tilt and the PokerStars, and PokerStars became king. And then obviously April 15th of 2011, they banned online poker from the U.S. And unfortunately, the fiasco at Full Tilt, where they didn't have money to pay the players, put a big black eye in the industry, and it was very sad. And I hate to see it, and it's unfortunate. And hopefully one day it's all going to come back. I still believe it is, maybe state by state, but I think it'll be a domino effect. And once it starts, once Pennsylvania does it or California does it or some big states do it, others are going to say, hey, why are we missing out on that revenue? We can get that because every state needs revenue.
Yeah.
And it's just mind-boggling to me how hypocritical it is, number one, that you can't do online poker, and number two, even people that are totally against gaming, which I can understand and I appreciate it. That's fine. If you don't like it, don't play it. But millions do like it. But even if you don't like it and don't play it, you benefit from your police department getting more money, from your roads getting paved and getting better, from your fire departments, from schools. So you make all these benefits. So why would anybody be against it? It just doesn't make sense to me. And so it's so crazy that you can go in a casino and play all day, and then you can't go home and play a $20 satellite or tournament, where you might win $1,000. I mean, it's so aggravating that it's just unbelievable.
Well, get you in a better mood. You mentioned the bracelet. You mentioned you had a big Tournament of Champions win, but getting your name on that trophy, that World Poker Tour trophy, because you mentioned the bracelets and how we've all been brainwashed into thinking, but I would love my name on that trophy. You know what I mean? That thing looks like the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, it's true. And, winning the bracelet, the thrill will never be the same because I was young. It was the first big thing. It was my dream of life back then.
Yeah.
But now that I've worked for the World Poker Tour, obviously, now you have to remember, Vince and I couldn't play WPT events for the first 8 years. So we've only been allowed to play the last 6 or so. And
you have a good record in those 6 years.
I have a decent record. I mean, I made 3 final tables and cashed a number of times. But getting the W, getting the win, boy, it really makes a difference. And it really was fun for me. And it's fun not just because of the prize money and to get your name on the trophy, because now I'm eligible to play in the Tournament of Champions. And, that's very prestigious to me because I created the original Tournament of Champions.
Yeah.
And then I won the WSOP Tournament of Champions in 2006. For $1 million, and so now I'm going to have an opportunity for the trifecta here if I could ever get lucky and win the Tournament of Champions of the World Poker Tour. So it's exciting to me, and there won't be anybody more excited to play in it than I will be because it's prestigious to me. And what's beautiful about it is now I'll be eligible the rest of my life to play in it. So, it's pretty cool winning that. And, of course, when you win at Playground Poker in Montreal, Canada, it's the absolute coolest prize in all of poker because it's literally a huge championship belt like you see world champion boxers get and UFC fighters get.
Yeah. And
it's the only one we have in poker. And I'm telling you, it weighs a lot. It's cool. It's hand engraved. And
how often do you wear it?
When I sent a picture back to my son who's 8 years old, he said, Dad, that's cool. He said, I want you to win that. I said, hey, I'd like to win it, but, they're pretty hard to win these events, And I did win it, so then I got to give him the belt. So he now owns the belt, but I got a picture of him on my phone now with wearing the belt around him so I get to see it every day.
It must have stung a little bit seeing Tony take one down, right?
No, actually I was happy for Tony because, I thought he was one of the smarter young guys coming up. And, he said he hadn't done good the first few years when he tried tournament poker and all and struggled a bit. And, but he had the vision to understand the value of taking the job with the World Poker Tour and how it could get him out there and the way he dresses and conducts himself. And now, has to deal with party poker and whatnot. And but he could see the limelight and he could see the benefits of, whose sponsorship may go after if and when poker becomes legalized online again, and it was sort of setting the table. So for him to get a WPT title, we still needle him about it, though, in that he won his event in the smallest field in the history of the World Poker Tour, down on an island down in.
Well, I hope Vince isn't needling him, because
yeah.
we still got to get Vince a title.
Yeah, Vince doesn't play that many. He plays once in a while. He just doesn't have the patience for tournament poker. Eventually, he just can't stand it. He bluffs his money off every time, and in the tournaments, even he gets owed a lot of chips sometimes. But he did good last year at Oklahoma. He got all the way down to the final 2 tables and had a shot there, and then he wasn't happy with the way he played from there out. But Vince just doesn't play that many. But maybe one day, hopefully, he'll get one too.
It must have been awesome recently seeing the first Open female winner out of a World Poker Tour.
Yeah, it was
in the same venue that you won yours.
Yeah, and her name was Emma. Her last name starts with a Z, and I just call her Emma.
Zemjovic, or?
Yeah, but I'm telling you, the girl can play. I mean, really play. Now, when I won my tournament, she finished 5th in that tournament. She was at that final table as well, and I promise you, from the 4th table all the way down to that final table, she was the boss at the tables. She dominated play. She sat right on my left and was the biggest thorn in my side. Every time I raised, she would 3-bet me. And every time I would make a continuing bet, she would call. Whether she had in or not, she would float. But whatever it took, but she was tough. And I was so glad that things didn't go well for her at my final table that I won the tournament. And she ran into some hands, and I might have misplayed one, and it cost her, and she ended up going out in 5th place. But I was so happy to see her back at the final table again in Montreal here just a week or so ago. And then she took the tournament off, and I was really happy to see it. And now
is that one going to be on TV as well?
And it's not on TV, unfortunately.
Because you would have some crazy insight.
It's it's not on TV, and I was there and I watched it all, but it wasn't a televised event. And I'm sad to see it because I want the world to see this girl play, because I'm telling you, she can play. I mean, really play the game. And
there were so many close calls over the years, too.
You're going to be seeing her a lot. Yeah, we had a lot of second-place finishes.
Was that J.J. Liu,
Yeah,
Kathy,
J.J. Liu, Kathy Liebert. I think Jennifer Harmon, she might have come 3rd. I don't know if she came 2nd.
I'm pretty sure J.J. did it like 3 times.
Yeah, but J.J.'s done it a couple times. And there's been a few of them that have gotten close, but they just haven't quite got there. So in an open event, meaning a buy-in event on the World Poker Tour.
Right.
Now, Min the Master Wynn's wife, Van Wynn, won our WPT Invitational one of the first couple of years, but poker players weren't even allowed to play in that. A lot of them. The big names were invited, but other guys couldn't get in, and it was a limited field because there were a lot of Hollywood celebrities. It was a very fast structure, 30-minute structures, and but still good for her.
Well, my boss here at Card Player made the final table of that one.
Yeah, he made the final table one year, and Barry Greenstein won that tournament. Lane Flack won that tournament, and Phil Locke won that tournament. So a lot of big-name players won those invitational tournaments, and so Van Wyn should get credit just like those guys do for winning a WPT title. And but the claim that she had, everybody couldn't enter, and it was a fast structure and blah, blah, blah. And it's been amazing to me that it's taken this long, honestly, for a woman to win. Now, Vanessa Selps came close once as well. And but I'm glad that monkey is off the back now, and women see that they can do it. And I think you're going to see more of this girl, Emma, I'll tell you the truth. I mean, she can play.
So you're a guy who wears like a lot of different hats, right? You get the books. By the way, I still have my signed copy of your strategy book from back in the day. But player, commentator, your brand ambassador, what do you consider your main job?
Well, the main job is probably with the World Poker Tour, followed by Party Poker.
But what do you want people to remember you by?
Well, I'd be happy if someone remembered, the guy could play a little bit, and he did a good job in promoting poker and being an ambassador for the game. And I do believe I played a key role in both televised poker and online poker. I had extremely key roles in both of those things, and obviously that's what turned poker into a global explosion and a huge popular game. So I'm proud of that niche, and I'm proud of the accomplishments I've had as a player. So I've run the full gamut, and I just hope people would say that guy was good for the game, and we were lucky to have him, kind of thing. That's all.
Well, I read a quote or an article that called you something like the only lock for poker's Mount Rushmore. So let's go with that, right? Let's say, okay, Mike Sexton is the first face on poker's Mount Rushmore, whatever that means. Who are the other three?
Well, in my book, you put Chip Reese up there first, maybe Doyle, Stu Unger, Puggy Pearson.
It's too many names already.
You know, I know I've got too many names, but to me, those guys are true Hall of Famers. Those are the legends in poker. You know, those guys back in the 70s that started the World Series of Poker, that played the highest stakes games in the world. You know, these guys are icons in my eyes, you know, and I'll never change that, you know, and you know, the Johnny Mosses and the Puggies and the Chips and the Doyles and the Stewies, you know, and the Jack Strausses. These guys, you know, will always be up there in my mind, you know, and I'll never rank ahead of them in my mind as a player. Now, all-around contributions of the game, yes, then perhaps I'll go past them. But you know, as far as players go, you know, I have a lot of players ranked way higher than me, honestly, and you know, but I do believe that
I think you're selling yourself short there.
Well, I played a role certainly in expanding the game, and I'm very proud of that. And you know, there's very few that have done, you know, probably more for the game than I have over the course of a career. So I am proud of that.
I have to ask: does Mike Sexton have any enemies? Is there anybody who doesn't like you? Because I had trouble finding anyone. So.
Well, I mean, there may be some out there. I don't know, you know, but I try to get along with everybody and you know, try to help everybody if I can.
No big confrontations, no professional rivals back in the day?
No, actually, even not back in the day. I don't think I've ever had any professional rivals. You know, you compete hard against each other, but away from the table, you know, you go have a beer and you laugh and you joke and you play golf together and, you know, it's just the life of a poker player. And you accept that at the table there are no friends. I mean, it is all enemies. And, you know, when I was growing up, nobody ever soft-played anybody. And, you know, you never felt sorry for a guy if he was losing because – you know, and I see it. You know, I've seen it in my career. You know, you feel sorry for guys because he's losing, and so you might not bet him like as hard as you might, or he's a friend of yours, and you're feeling sorry. But if you don't get his money, somebody else is going to get it. So
yeah, better you than someone else.
You only have X amount of opportunities a day in terms of making money with hands that you have, and if you don't take advantage of those as a professional player, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage.
Now, I know your autobiography, Life's a Gamble. Go get it. Get it on Amazon. Actually, I'm going to recommend people get it on the audio version. You read that one, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm
going to get that one
version.
next.
I promise you'll enjoy it. It's fun to hear it in my voice and hear the stories, and it's a great book. And anybody out there that doesn't know about it by now, it's called Life's a Gamble. It's not a how-to poker book, but there's a lot of life lessons in there that you can learn.
Full of stories.
Yeah, and there's a lot of gambling stories from the real icons of the poker world, and a lot of stories on the golf course and gambling. A lot of history of the World Series of Poker, the first 30 years of the World Series of Poker. There's stories about them. It tells about the poker explosion.
Well, there's a book's full of a lot of prop bets, and the one I read about was when you laid Ivey 30-1 on the first 50K.
Yeah.
Which was a dangerous situation because he made that final table.
Yeah. Did he ever? He made a 30, and the guy would never settle either. I tried to sell for $300,000. You know, I mean, I tried to sell for $100,000.
The bet was $10K?
Huh?
The bet was $10K? No.
Yeah.
$10K for so
yeah.
30 to
I laid
1.
him 30-1.
Okay.
So I was laying him $300,000 to $10,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On the first horse tournament. Now I thought there'd be about 150 entries, and there were. I think there were 148 entries in the first event, and he said, "I'll take 80-1." I said, "No." He said, "I'll take 71. We're playing in a poker game together." I said, "No." He said, 60, 50. I said, "Phil, I'll lay you 30-1. I told you that." And he's negotiating all the way down. So finally he takes 10,000, two $5,000 chips. He throws them across the table. He said, "Okay, I'm taking 30-1 on myself." Now we're playing a few minutes later. Now he takes another 10,000. He said, "I want to bet another 10,000 on myself." I said, "The price went down." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well," he said, "you're 25-1 now." I said, "You can bet at 25-1. He said, "No, I got to have at least 30-1. I threw the 10,000 back at him. I said, "No, I'm not." You know, of course, I didn't really want to bet anymore anyway. And
now you're on the hook just in case he wins it.
So now I'm playing in a tournament, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I'm gonna lose 300,000 maybe to this guy," because he's playing, he's going long, and I dump my chips off early on day 2, because I'm just always focused on his table instead of mine. Now he makes the final table. And now I come in the next day, and there's a pot lemon Omaha game going right next to the final table, believe it or not. They had a cash game going. And so I'm sitting in there. I got a seat in there because I wanted to watch this final table that he's at. And Chip Reese was there, and and Andy Block and some others. But anyway, but now it's strictly no limit hold'em. Remember, they played limit poker all the way to the final table. Now it's strictly no limit hold'em.
Doyle was at that final table too.
And where he's the, I know he felt he's the big favorite there, but he was sitting 7th in chips when the final table started. So now he comes by my table. He says, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'll give you 125,000." And he thought about it. "No, I'll take 150." I said, "No, good luck to you." So I went back to the table. Now, Greg Rammer was sitting in the game with me. Now, he gets out his calculator. I said, "How many chips has he got?" And he gets his calculator. He's calculating all this. He said, "It's impossible not to take 100,000. It's impossible." He said, "His equity is only $47,400. It's impossible not to take a." I said, "Greg," I said, "You don't know Phil Ivey."
Yeah.
I said, "First of all, I'd rather beat me out of the 300,000 than win the $2.5 million he's going to win over there. That's number one." And he believes he's going to win the tournament. So now they play down. He's still in. They get down to the final 3 players. He's still in. Now he's still short on chips. He's only still got about 25% of the chips. And now he comes by the table again. He's laughing and cackling. "What do you want to do now, big boy?" he says.
Well, by now he's locked up $600K.
And yeah, but I said, "I'll give you 100." I said, "I'll give you 100,000," because he still didn't have anywhere near a third of the chips. And he said, "Just because it's you," he said, "I'll take 125." I said, "No." I said, "I'll give you 100. Good luck to you." And he didn't take the 100.
Man.
He went back and played. The very first hand back at the table, he was all in. And I had to sweat it, and he got knocked out in 3rd place. So,
Man, you had to sweat so much.
but what a sweat. But the very next year, I didn't learn my lesson. I gave him the same Tim debt. For the next 2 years, I gave it to him, but he was always out in day one the next couple of years after that, so I never had a sweat. But it was a big sweat for 300,000 just to try to win 10, I must say.
I like it. We just wrap up with some quick rapid-fire stuff. Any weirdest place you've ever been recognized by a fan or weirdest fan experience?
Oh, gosh.
Because you're one of the, I'd say, dozen poker players who could probably be recognized by most of the public, right?
Probably. I mean, I get recognized in airports a fair amount, and sometimes it's funny because I'm sitting at a bar talking to somebody on the right, and the guy on my left or somebody will turn around. "I knew that was you. I recognized the voice."
Yeah.
And everybody recognizes my voice, so they all say that to me. I recognize
Is that a
the
Dayton voice, by the way,
talking.
or is it a North Carolina?
No, it's not. It's a North Carolina voice,
Okay.
actually. I lived in North Carolina 15 years, and I picked up a little southern twang down there, and because they always thought I was a damn Yankee that came south, back then. And
what about in Fort Bragg?
But that's where I picked up the southern accent was when I lived in North Carolina, and it's bode well for me.
Yeah, it works. It works on camera for sure. Do you remember your first? Well, that wouldn't work because most people they don't jump right in.
I remember my what?
I asked people what their first big life tournament experience was.
Yeah, well, mine was in Lake Tahoe with Amarillo Slim Super Bowl of Poker.
Oh, the Super Bowl of Poker. That's right.
Yeah, back in 1980 or 1981. He held the Super Bowl of Poker up in Lake Tahoe up there, and I went up there, and all the players went up there. Now, back then, Amarillo Slim played 3 places, 60% for first, 30% for second, 10% for third. That was it.
Didn't matter how
so
many.
So you could have 170 players in a tournament, only 3 got paid.
Wow.
I mean, it was really unbelievable. And so to make the money in his tournament was not easy. And I played in the Raz tournament. The first cash I ever had in any poker tournament was in Amarillo Slim. And I finished third, and I was so proud of that. And I still have my picture of me in Amarillo Slim. Him giving me the money back then in third place. But I still didn't get the World Series for a few more years after that.
Super Bowl of Poker. That'd be a fun one to revive.
It was fun. It was
another one.
Believe me, it was a huge event. In the 80s, all the big players that played the World Series went to Slim Super Bowl. It was a big event back in the day. And he held it in Lake Tahoe most of the years. He held it in Vegas here the first year and then went to Reno and then moved it up to Lake Tahoe. And everybody loved going up there because he held it, right after this, the week before the Super Bowl, or week right after the Super Bowl, and it was snowing and everybody went skiing, and it was just a beautiful time. It was a great event.
I don't think you listen to music at the tables. I don't think I've ever seen you with headphones on.
I do once in a while.
Okay.
Like at the World Series events when you play long day ones, 12, 14 hours, I'll listen to them there.
If there's a particular chatty guy
but
in your...
normally speaking in WPT events, I don't because I'd rather socialize at the table.
But what are you listening to when you do? What is...
I listen like old, oldies but goodies and rhythm and blues, and it's old swing dance music, what shag dance music, and what it's a form of swing dance, and it's the greatest music ever. And
I bet you're a good swing dancer.
Yeah, I mean, I like to dance. I grew up dancing in a dance family, and I've always danced, and met all the wives and everybody dancing all the time, generally speaking.
See, that's how you become good with women, I think.
Yeah,
if you're a man who can
in
dance
my life,
and not
it's
afraid
how
to.
all the women I went steady with and all the wives except one, I met out dancing. So it definitely played a big role in my life for sure. And
I can imagine.
And it is the best way to get to women for sure, because all women like a guy that can dance.
Yeah, I imagine poker not so much the greatest profession for relationships.
Yeah, but I mean, you see a lot of guys do meet women that play poker and they end up getting together. But in my situation, it was always on the dance floor.
Let's wrap up with two more. What's your favorite tournament destination?
Well, I have to say Montreal right now. So, as a poker player, it's funny. You always like places that you do well at.
Yeah.
Now, I used to do well at the Aviation Club in Paris, so I used to like to go there. I always did well at Foxwoods. Now, back in the 90s, Foxwoods was huge.
Yeah.
And it was massive, and I always did well there. And now Montreal, that I've won there, so where you do well is where you always have your fondest memories, and so that's what are most popular with you. So, I fall in that same category, I guess.
I like it. We always end the podcast with a random question from a random question generator. And this is the one that came up when I clicked for you. What is the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
The best piece of advice that I've ever received.
I know, that's a tough one to dig deep for.
That is a tough one,
That's one I should have looked up beforehand. Fed it to you early.
Yeah.
Gave you some time to prep.
Well, I guess the best piece of advice, stay out of trouble. When I was a kid growing up, I guess, but we were pretty wholesome kids when I grew up. Most kids that played sports. Back in my day, we didn't have gangs, we didn't have drugs. We didn't have R-rated movies back then. Nobody locked their doors at night. It was just a different era and a different time. And honestly, I believe growing up in the 60s and the 50s were the best time in American history to grow up, because you didn't have those kind of problems. And everything was about high school sports and playing sports and getting a varsity letter. And, that was the big thing back in my day. And, so I was blessed in that regard. And, I've never spent a night in jail, so I guess that's pretty good. So.
That's good. That's rare for a poker player.
Yeah, well, some of them have spent time there, but...
and I'm sure you passed the same advice off to your son. Stay out of trouble.
So, yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, I'm proud of him right now. He's doing good and does good in school, and he's playing all kinds of sports, and hopefully he'll latch on to one. Right now we've got him playing, basketball and football, or not football, but basketball and baseball and soccer, and he tried karate and gymnastics. So we just want him to do the full gamut, and then finally, hopefully, find something he gets really attached to and likes. And
I heard a podcast about that. It says you're not. The old generation says you're supposed to stick to it and write something out when you start it, never quit. But the new generation says try everything. Be afraid. Don't be afraid to fail.
No, I believe you should try everything and try all the sports. And nowadays, even young kids, 10 years old, they're traveling teams in baseball, and it's year round, and you don't have time for any other sports. If you're whether it's a lacrosse player, whether it's a hockey player, whether it's a baseball player, all those people have traveling teams, and you don't get the experience other sports. And now obviously kids that parents want them to be tennis pros and golf pros, and they get them starting young, and on the golf courses and going to camps and all that, and they miss a childhood, I think, a lot of times by being too dedicated to one sport when they're young, and so few make it in the pros. Yeah, you just wonder, is it all worth it? And are you better off to have a happy kid that experiences everything?
But what about poker?
Poker, I've not taught him anything about poker, and
he's still got 10 years before he can play.
It's funny,
right?
My nephews and nieces, and they have kids, and they're playing poker now a little bit, but we're trying to keep them away from it. I don't want them to play, and I know how tough it is to make a living playing poker. Now, obviously, once he gets out of college, and if he started playing and likes it, and I'd help him with it or something. But in truth, I hope he gets into a job and gets a paycheck, and I've done very well, as a poker player and as in the poker world, but I know how tough it is, and I see it out there on tour. And it's tougher and tougher now than it was back when I played. And I played the tour 15 years before there was any big prize money out there.
Yeah.
And, it's just a different world out there, and it's just really tough. There's so many smart kids that have come into poker now. Back in my day, the big players were Puggy Pearson and Amarillo Slim. Well, these guys were pool hustlers that found poker games in the back of the pool hall, and they learned they could make more money playing poker, so they started playing poker. But nowadays, all the young guys have played online poker. They've watched the World Poker Tour since they've been little tykes. They're all college graduates and smart, sharp guys that catch on quick and understand the power of betting. And there's so many books and software applications and everything that they become better players. And they get so good so fast, it's tough out there. It's really tough. Now, obviously, I would never discourage anybody who had a passion for it that wanted to do it, but the advice I give anybody that's even thinking about turning pro is, not just because you're a winning poker player. My question to them is, do you love to play poker? Not like to play, love to play. Because if you don't love to play the game, I don't care if you're a winning player, you're going to be miserable and have a miserable life. If you dread going in the poker rooms and playing, if you dread going on the tournament circuit, if you're not happy, you're not going to be happy in life. And, I was very fortunate my entire career. I loved playing poker. I never got tired of it, ever. And I played 7 days a week, 10, 12, 20 hours a day. It didn't matter. And when one game was over, I couldn't wait till the next day to go back and play again. So I've been fortunate. I love to play, Now, I don't love to play now like I used to.
Yeah.
But now I don't have to grind it out like I used to either. But the first 25 years, I would never get tired of playing poker. I just love the game. I love playing. And to me, I think that's the key to being successful as a professional poker player.
I just want to follow up on that love because you're 69 now. How long do you want to?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Doyle's my idol here. He's playing 1,500, 3,000 mixed games with the best players and in the highest stakes cash games in the world. I mean, the guy's 85 years old or something. It's unbelievable that he plays in the highest stakes games there are and has for all these years. And so, but he tells me, he said, Mike, if I don't play, he said, what am I going to do? He said, what else am I going to do but bet on the games and play poker? And he knows if he stops doing it, just sits in a rocking chair, he's going to die. Yeah. So it keeps your mind going, and so I'm hoping to keep playing for a while longer, and certainly I hope to keep working for the World Poker Tour a little while longer, and I love it. To me it's not work. And, when you love your job, my dad said don't ever quit working if you love your job. So hopefully we'll go a few more years. Now, when my son gets to be 10, 11, if he really gets serious about sports, I know then.
Little League coach comes out.
Yeah, I'm not going to want to travel, and it kills me now, and he's just playing pee-wee ball in these games. If I'm on the road when he's got a game, it just drives me crazy because, I love to go into practice. I love to go into games, and I will never, ever miss one of his games if I'm in town, ever, as long as I live. And nothing's going to make me happier that when I'm retired is just to follow him in his life and just watch him grow up, and that's what I'm looking forward to. But, until you get to be at least 10, where you start serious Little League or you start other sports, so I got a couple more years yet to work still, and we'll see what happens at the end of that time if I'll keep working or not.
Mike, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully everybody gets a copy of Life's a Gamble. I promise you it's a fun, entertaining read.
Go buy a physical copy on Amazon right now. Bring it to the World Series. Mike will sign it for you.
I sure will, or anywhere else.
And go get the Audible version where you can hear Mike say it himself.
Yeah, I promise you, if you like poker, if you like golf, or if you like gambling stories of any kind, you'll love Life's a Gamble.
Wow, what a legend, right? If you like those stories, then be sure to check out Mike's book, Life's a Gamble. Follow him on Twitter at MikeSexton_WPT. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Again, email us at pokerstories@cardplayer.com with your review, and you'll be eligible to win a free digital subscription to the magazine. See you next time.